Welcome to Violet Crush Month 2. I did some pre-assembly so that it wouldn't take so long for you to see how to put a block together, so forgive me if it gets confusing, but if you have any questions, you can send me a message on Facebook. The one that I went ahead and did was your very first A and L. This is such a large piece, it's difficult to do sitting down. So once you get your A and L, once again you're going to draw a center line and sew a 1/4 inch on each side. You can draw a 1/4 inch line on each side if you want, but I don't find it necessary. So these two units become unit 1. So we're going to put those aside for now. Unit 2 is L and K. Make sure you keep everything labeled. Let's see if you can see this. Labels are your friend. This entire quilt requires consistent labeling, so just save your labels from one point to another. We're going to mark this and get it ready to stitch. Since we're using batiks, we don't have a right and wrong side, which is nice. This again is a sandpaper board. As you can see, my fabric will not move as I'm marking. That is a big help for this quilt because there is a lot of marking. I'm going to move this out of our way and stitch a 1/4 inch each side of the line. Make sure all your edges are even. These are such nice fabrics. Double check your 1/4 inch every time that you start a new block, because it is possible that things could move, not necessarily, but I'd rather check it twice and know that I have the right seam. And I am saving every triangle that I cut off of any of the pieces. So I'm going to use them all as my leaders and enders. So by the time I'm finished with this quilt, I won't have any scrap pieces left over. So let's cut this apart. We're going to set our seam. And we're going to cut on the line. And it tells you in your instructions to not trim these, and the reason is we're going to sew these again onto another piece of fabric. So let's press these open. Whatever I'm pressing to, I like to put that piece on top. I just barely lift and let the iron move my fabric. You're less likely to get a crease if you do that. So here is our unit 2s. So we're going to put those aside for now because we don't need them just yet. We're going to go on to unit 3, which is fabric B and O. This is B, this is O. We're going to mark again, diagonal line, these dark purple ones are a little difficult to see, and I will tell you ahead of time to make sure you get the right pencil for one thing. If you have a purple cutting mat, when you start cutting these blocks, you can't see your fabric. I had to switch mats to cut some of this. Once again, we're going to sew 1/4 inch on each side of the line. And if you're doing all these at once, as you would in your instructions, you will just chain sew. But to save time, I'm only going to do one at a time. So doing one at a time, I stitch down one side, pull it out, make sure the thread goes back in under the needle, stitch down the other side. Pay attention to where your line is, not where your needle is. And as I said before, I've saved everything that I have cut off so far that can be resewn into something else. Quarter inch each side. Set your seam. Cut. Press open. Okay, these become Unit 3. So let's put a label on there. We know what we're working with. Okay, now we're going to have some fun. We're going to take our half square triangle from Unit 1 and put it on a solid square zero fabric or O fabric. Draw a diagonal line from this corner to this corner. You don't want to go this way, we've already sewn that. So from this where you don't have a seam line, we're going to make a seam line. 1/4 inch each side. You will do this on all your pieces. Make sure that thread goes back in under the needle. When you get to this point, make sure your seam stays down. You don't want a flipped seam. Going to set our seam again. Be sure you do a lot of pressing. Pressing is what makes your finished product look so much nicer, especially when you get the seam to go flat. Okay, now we're going to cut this in half. On the drawn line, when you open that up, you have a very interesting block. And I want to show you both of these because you need to mark them correctly for their placement in the block. Your instructions will show you. Here, this is fabric A, fabric L, and fabric O. You can see that L is on the left side there and the right side there. L is your light fabric. Now we want to mark these as unit 4A and 4B. Be sure you get it on the right piece. Okay, now we're going to put those two pieces aside and go to our next step. Excuse me. We go back to here and it's showing us to use unit 2, which is these two pieces. And we're going to put that on a fabric C. And I like to do all of the unit 1 first and then the unit 2s. It's less confusing. So now we're going to mark on the back side of this our diagonal line again. I use a variety of marking pencils because it depends on what color fabric I'm using, and sometimes it just depends on which one is it within finger reach. I really like the Soline products. This pen disappears after a while, and this is the best one that I've ever found for marking on dark fabrics. It makes a skinny line that you can see, but it's not in the way after you finish sewing. Line these up. Quarter inch each side again, and you would be doing all of them at once. If I was making the quilt myself, I would do them all at once, but to save time, I know you do not want to be sitting here watching me sew when you could be sewing. I always keep the picture of what the block is supposed to look like in front of me. That way, as I'm assembling, I have a better idea if I have everything in the right order. So let's put another ender here. And this is to keep your fabric from getting pulled down in that hole by the feed dogs. With this, we're going to set our seams again. You're going to get tired of hearing me say that, but we have to set our seams. Need to cut that. Now we're going to go back and trim as soon as we press these open. When you get to this point, you're going to trim everything to size. So these become Unit 5A and Unit 5B. Let's go ahead and mark those before we cut any further. Now we need to trim. Let's go back to our large ones first because they're the most difficult to trim. They get trimmed to 6.5 inches. happen to have a 6.5-inch ruler. You can line this diagonal line up. I actually prefer to line it up for this line than that line because it just gives a better finish. So we're going to put that on there. Trim the entire block to 6.5 inches. And sorry I have to get in front of the camera to do this, but trying to do all of this while seated is a challenge for me. So we have a nice finished block ready to set aside. Let's trim the other one. And as you're trimming this, you want the corners of your ruler right in that seam line. Another problem with sitting down trimming. You can't get over top of it to see where you are. So we want to relabel these so that we can set them aside. Once again, we have fabric A, 4A, and 4B. Let's put those aside. We need to trim these. As you're looking at your, as you look at your paper, 5A, 5B. I'll get them right in a minute. Just bear with me. I had some extras already cut and I set them in the correct fashion. There we go. So we trim these to 3.5 inches, and I do have a 3.5-inch square ruler, but it's not in front of me, so we will just square this up to 3.5 inches. Not much left there to trim. There's one. A lot of trimming, but I prefer to trim at this point than to have it exact size while sewing, because your fabric usually does tend to stretch a little bit as you're sewing. So there we go. Let's clean up our mess. I generally keep a little dish beside my machine to put all my scrap in, so when I'm finished sewing I can just take it to the scrap bin and dump it. Let's remark these again. These are unit 5B and 5A. Let's put all these away. Now we're going to come down. We're going to take a fabric E. All your instructions are very clear, so you should not have any problems whatsoever with doing this. We're going to take a fabric E and we're going to put it on the corner of unit 4A. This is our 4A. We're putting it on the corner of the dark, and I know that looks strange, but that is the correct way to do it. So we need to mark this. We're going to put it in the corner. Line it up. Sew on the line. Set our seam. Cut on the line. 1/4 inch from the line. So lay your block like that. You're going to cut the 1/4 inch to the right. Press that open. This is now unit 6A. We're going to do the same thing on the other one because we need 2 units. So get unit 4B, another fabric E. I pull them off the bottom so that I don't lose my label. And I will suggest you do them individually like I have. That way you get them in the right direction. Same process. Match up your corners. Pin if you want to. I am not a pinner. I end up pinning me and not my fabric. So I like to just hold it. press and cut, and I promise we are getting real close to assembling a block. And you need a total of just 4 of these blocks. Some of them are 4, some are 5, some are 8. There we go. This is 6B. We're going to put that aside. Now we're going to using our fabric M. I'm going to get 2 pieces because we might need to do 2 blocks. We're going to use our unit 3s, which are these. And what we're doing here is putting one of these in each of the dark corners. So let's mark our pieces. The only thing that I don't like about this sandpaper board is by the time you get done with a quilt this size, you have very filed down fingernails. Place one of these in the corner. I want to use my already pre-trimmed ones. So on the line, and while you're doing yours, all of yours, you can do chain sewing, which makes finishing the block so much faster instead of doing 1 or 2 units at a time. Get these off and trimmed. Set our seams. Give me a second to get this mess cleaned up. That's distracting. Trim a 1/4 inch from your stitched line. And press that open. These become Unit 7. And I'm going to put a line through that so we don't mistake it for an L. Okay, now we are finally ready to do some assembly. We're going to take one of our 3.5 inch L's. we're going to need to do 2 of those, so let's just go ahead and lay those out. We're going to use our unit 5A. That is this one. We're going to put it that way. And this way. And a unit 7, which is what we just finished. I'm going to put that there. So you can see how that looks. We're going to sew that together, and I might have to trim a couple of pieces because we do need to do two of these. And I know I pre-assembled there we go. We have 2 of those, 2 of those, and 2 of these. So let's sew these together. I'm going to put them this direction. I do not want to start sewing where this seam is, so I'm going to flip it upside down. But since we need 2 of these, for sewing purposes, I am only going to do 1 at a time, so not to cause any confusion. We're going to flip this over, sew this down, so we can continue our chain sewing. Let's flip this and upside down. I want to cut this off. Place that back. Sew the next one. Well, maybe I can cut it off. And we're going to sew these. So there's 1 unit ready to sew together. I do prefer chain sewing. Much faster, much easier. But keep your labels in the right fashion so that you don't get lost. Now we're going to sew this. You want to lock these seams. Make sure one is they're going opposite directions of each other. And normally I would press before I start stitching, but sometimes it's easier to just get it all stitched together and then press. You can feel those seams lock and hold that top seam down so that it doesn't flip on you. Check out your other joining pieces to make sure that all your points are going to match. So there's one. Let's go ahead and do this one. Anytime that you're joining seams, if you can make those interlocking seams, you get a much nicer finished piece. It's not always possible, especially as you start putting blocks together, because you may have pressed in one direction and something you're joining is pressed in the same direction. Okay, I'm going to use my little gypsy quilter cutter. So you can see how that works. It's really handy if you have lots of pieces. Now we're going to, once again, like we did in our first block, we're going to flip these seams so we get a 4-patch in the center so that our block stays flat. If you want to press from the back first so you can see which direction these seams need to go, that is fine. I most of the time press from this side and then flip it over and press from the front. Sometimes these just don't want to give it up. You can take a little pair of scissors and snip that one thread that's holding it, and it will flatten. Let's flatten this out. There's one block. I'm going to do the same thing here. Flip that open so that you get a 4-patch. Take your thumb and finger and kind of pinch it down. Press your seam in the direction you want it to go. And then press from the front. Okay, that gives us those blocks. Now we're going on down to here. We're going to use a unit (6A) and 6B. And 2 of these units, you watch where you place your solid square. One goes to the top and one goes to the bottom. Now we'll sew these in the same fashion. And we almost have one of our 8 blocks done. Or 4 blocks, I'm sorry. Everything was 8 pieces, but this 4 blocks. And I really like it when all my points are perfect, but this is not a perfect world. So every now and then you're going to get one that just will not cooperate, but it will be okay. As Eleanor Burns says, if you can't see it from a 747, it doesn't count. I like mine a little closer than that, but I will tell you now that if you're taking something apart to correct a point, if it's still not right after the second time, give it up, because your fabric is not going to hold up for 3 times. You'll end up stretching it and you won't be happy at all. And don't ask me how I know that. So we're going to press this one and set that seam. Press it to the triangle. And the same here. And then as we put them together, we will realize that we have to press one the opposite direction. I like to press the way you know you should first, and then when it comes time to joining seams, check out which direction you need to go. Okay, now we're going to make sure that those seams join. At this point, where this is so large, I will put a clip there to hold that for me, because I want to watch and see how I can line up these seams to get a good point. And if you've kept all your seams 1/4 inch, when you sew everything together, it should be good. Sometimes your machine just does not like all of those seams. Okay, let's see how well we did on camera so I can figure out if it's good enough or if I need to redo it. I'm going to press my seam and press it open. And it's not exactly perfect in the center, but it's not enough that I'm going to take it apart. So there is a finished block 2 that I just sewed together incorrectly. I am so sorry. So do as I say, not as I did. This is why it's important to label. I should have had this piece joining this piece. So let me see if I can pause real quick and get that corrected.